Hi, good evening, good morning, good afternoon to all of you, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, Executive Education Singapore Futures webinar on the future of sustainability. My name is Cheryl Chung and I'm the Program Director of Executive Education Singapore Futures, and really delighted to host all of you today in our wonderful webinar. Usually we have a very great diversity of participants coming in from all over the world. So we would love it if you would put your name in the chat, let us know where you're joining us from. So also our panelists have some sense of where you're coming from. I do see some familiar faces, so really would love to hear from you. If you can just let us know where you're joining us from, so we get a little bit of a sense of where all of you are coming from. Oh, fantastic. See people as far as the Netherlands, which is fantastic. Philippines, Singapore, UAE. Wow, okay. Really, really delighted to see all of you and really thankful for you joining us, but also your interest in this topic. It's really great. As many of you who I see are repeat participants in our programs, we do this monthly webinar series to kind of raise awareness on futures thinking and scenario planning as applied to public policy. But this year we've been focused very much on the topics, right? So today, of course, talking a little bit about sustainability, and really, really looking forward to having a great discussion. I'm not going to yabber on too much more, but I would say that, we've got about an hour or so, we're very delighted to host a distinguished panel. Of course, will be moderated by Farah Sanwari, who is our Executive Education Singapore Futures Fellow here at the Lee Kuan Yew School, and of course, a sustainability advocate and expert in her own right. Looking forward to her asking our panel many interesting and difficult questions, but also, holding space for all of us to also engage with the panel. If you don't mind, let me just introduce the panel briefly before I hand over to Farah. So we're really delighted to have three distinguished panelists. As always, when we talk about futures issues, we really want to get a wide diversity of views, and we're so happy that these three panelists have joined us from their own different kind of expertise and then different areas of interest. So first we have with us Benedict Chia, who is the Director of Strategic Issues at the National Climate Change Secretariat, Prime Minister's Office here at Singapore. Esther, who's Sustainability Officer, City Developments Limited, Singapore as well. And Nur Lastrina Hamid, co-founder of Singapore Youth for Climate Action. So really delighted to have and host the three of you, and of course, as I mentioned, our wonderful moderator, Farah. So wishing you all a fantastic conversation on the future of sustainability. Let's explore the uncertainties and different pathways that this future might take. We're really interested to hear all of your views, and do invite everyone to ask great questions later on. Over to you, Farah.
Thanks, Cheryl. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Futures Forward, a webinar series by the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy Executive Education Unit. I'm Farah, as Cheryl has introduced, your moderator for this evening, morning, or afternoon, wherever you are. And I'm really honored and happy to be here today with you and our lovely panelists, whom I will introduce shortly. So as you know, the topic for today is about the future of sustainability. And the word sustainability itself has taken root in our society for the past few years. It's a topic that really, makes me not sleep at night, knowing that the threat of climate change is imminent and that climate change itself is evident. And it's also affecting not just our environment, but our society and economy. And because of that, we as a people question ourselves and the way that we've been living our lives, and is what we're doing today okay for the future in the long run? What of the system today, be in the way we govern ourselves or how we run our businesses, needs to change for a truly sustainable life on Earth? Right. So in the past few years, we've also seen rapid developments and changes in many aspects of our lives that leans into sustainability. And in many parts of the world, including Singapore, governments are acknowledging the threat of climate change and creating Green New Deals, green plans, to effectively address inequity and promote a sustainable economy. We are also seeing civic activism, notably youth-led activism by Greta Thunberg. I mean, how dare you, right? Has risen in prominence, and it has been a catalyst for the private and public sector to act. So there's really a lot to unpack today. And the future of sustainability is not determined by a single sector of society alone. We need effective partnership and cooperation between the public, people, and private sector in order to achieve a sustainable future. Which brings me to our guest speakers for today. Like Cheryl has shared, we have three brilliant individuals who are affecting the future of sustainability. We have Mr. Benedict Chia, Director for Strategic Issues under the National Climate Change Secretariat in the Prime Minister's Office of Singapore. We have Esther, Chief Sustainability Officer of City Developments Limited, and Ms. Nur Lastrina Hamid, co-founder of the Singapore Youth for Climate Action. So our very own Greta Thunberg, I suppose. So what's going to happen today is that each speaker will get a turn to speak, and right before they speak, I shall give a full introduction of that speaker so that it will be fresh on your minds. And our speaker will be sharing for approximately 10 minutes. I mean, I'll let this flow because, you know, this is also a very friendly, welcoming space for people to share as much as they want to. And they will be sharing on the future of sustainability from their perspective, wearing their individual hats from the people, private and public sector. So following that, we will enter a Q&A session where your questions, which you can start posting anyway right now, you know, as we start the webinar, you know, we will answer that question right after they speak, right? Okay, so yeah, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Benedict Chia. Give me a second. Mr. Benedict Chia is the director for, sorry, again, let me repeat that. Director for Strategy Issue, National Climate Change Secretariat, Prime Minister's Office. He is responsible for economic research and development of low carbon technologies and futures work. And prior to that, he has served in the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Trade and Industry, as well as Ministry of Environment and Water Resources, newer. And because he's also in the strategic issues, he's very familiar with futures work. This is a very exciting thing to do because I, as a futures fellow here, there'll be some words that's very interesting in the future space, like, you know, wild cards or weak signals, driving forces, things like that. It'll be quite interesting to hear from Benedict's perspective. Without further ado, Mr. Benedict Chia, could you please share with us your perspective on the future of sustainability?
Well, thanks so much, Farah, for the very, very kind introduction. So I'm Benedict. I'm from the National Climate Change Secretariat. We were set up as an outfit within the Prime Minister's Office in 2010. So 2010 was really just after the collapse of the Copenhagen climate talks. But at that point in time, we felt that climate change was an important issue that is quite likely to be with us for a while. And that was one of the reasons why the Secretariat was being formed. And our role within the Secretariat is to really work with the various stakeholders, both within and outside government in Singapore, to advance, to shape, and to set the direction for our climate policies itself. On the issue of the future of sustainability, I'll talk about four very broad trends which we have seen happening, and hopefully that lays the groundwork and that helps bring in the other my other panelists on the panel itself. The first I will start with is really about climate ambition, and on that, one of the big things that has really happened over the last couple of years is this shift towards net zero by 2050. If you look at Glasgow decisions last year, at the end of COP last year, there was a shift in anchor. There was a shift in anchor towards 1.5 degrees, the world trying to work towards 1.5 degrees. And I say that's a major and a significant shift, because if I just rewind back a couple of years to 2015 and I use the Paris Agreement as a reference, the Paris Agreement actually anchors 2 degrees instead of 1.5 degrees. And you may ask, what's the difference between 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees? And the main difference is that in a 2-degree world, the world collectively only needs to reach net zero by around 2070. But if you want to keep temperature increase to within 1.5 degrees, then it's not 2070, but it's 2050. And I think if you look at the number of countries, if you look at the number of corporates that have made net zero by 2050 pledges, you will realize that a significant number of them has been a huge increase, at least over the last couple of years. We track them and we see this huge spike itself. Aligned with what has been agreed at Glasgow last year, this year in our budget statement, we have actually, our finance minister actually stated and announced that Singapore is going to work towards net zero by around mid-century. And we're currently in the process of consultations and engagements. Before later part of this year, we hope to announce a very specific net zero year itself. So that's the first big trend that we see, this shift towards net zero by 2050. The second trend, or in terms of where we see the future of sustainability, is really a lot more collaboration across countries. If you look at some of the key technology solutions out there, like hydrogen, for example, many more countries are coming together to talk about it, to talk about establishing global supply chains, to talk about global certification standards and whatnot, to give assurance on where's the origin of hydrogen, for example. The other area where we see significant collaboration is what has been agreed last year at COP, which is it's the technical term is Article 6, but Article 6 is really a framework for cooperative approaches. It's a framework where countries can come together to cooperate on reducing emissions. And the outcome of that cooperation in terms of abatement and mitigation outcomes can be traded internationally as carbon credits. And that is a significant milestone, because we have tried a number of years to secure Article 6, but we were not successful in securing Article 6. Last year was a fairly monumental effort. Singapore was approached to help in the effort, and our Minister for Sustainability and Environment, Grace Fu, agreed to drive and to co-facilitate at the ministerial level. And I think we are quite happy that we've managed to play a part in bringing the global community to agree on Article 6 itself. So that's really the second trend, countries coming together, cooperating on developing decarbonization solutions. The third trend I wanted to talk a little bit about is that actually, if you look over time, many of these solutions to reduce emissions have actually fallen in cost significantly. Solar is one example that people have talked about. If you look at the trends right now, electric vehicle prices are also falling. The hope is that hydrogen may also follow the same trend. And the implication of this is that going green, embracing net zero, is increasingly being seen as a trade-off. If I do this, it comes at higher cost to the economy. There is sacrifices that need to be made. There is still higher cost. I'm not saying that there's no higher cost. There is still transition costs in terms of some of the current incumbents needing to make the shift, needing to make the adjustments. But it's increasingly being seen as a virtuous cycle instead of a trade-off itself. And many companies that we have spoken to have actually pointed out the fact that it's becoming increasingly necessary to be able to make the shift, to make the transition if they were to thrive and to succeed in a low-carbon future itself. Finally, the last trend that I wanted to raise is going forward, I think we see a more multi-stakeholder environment where it's not just the government driving action, being seen as the one that is responsible for doing all the hard work in order to achieve the reductions itself. But I think we see corporates, we see cities, we see the people sector coming in a very much bigger way. Corporates setting very ambitious targets, cities which are below the federal government in most other countries have also taken the lead and jumped ahead with very ambitious goals. And consumers increasingly are voting in terms of how they make their purchase decisions, looking at green and more sustainable products in a more favorable light compared to how they did so in the past. So I think going forward, it's a difficult journey towards net zero, but I think it's one in which there are more partners along the way, and we look forward to working very closely with various stakeholders, both within and outside Singapore, in order to realize our vision. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Benedict. That was a great sharing about the 4 key trends by Mr. Benedict Chia about what the future of sustainability could hold, and the important things that we could take note of is about climate ambition. There's definitely much more ambition, collaboration across countries, and the cost of renewable energy falling, and having multi-stakeholder engagement and cooperation. So these are like 4 key points and 4 key takeaways. I do have some questions, but I think that would be for later. But we do have our next speaker to share with us from the private sector's perspective. We have Ms. Esther An, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer of CDL, City Development Limited. So Ms. Esther An has been an advocate for green building and sustainability for over 2 decades, and she's been instrumental in establishing CDL's global leadership in sustainability since 1995. It's really amazing. Ranked the top real estate company in 2021 and 2022 global 100 most sustainable corporations in the world, CDL was the first Singapore company to publish a dedicated sustainability report in 2008, when it was not really trendy, and issued a green bond in 2017. It became the first real estate company in Southeast Asia to pledge the World Green Building Net Zero Carbon Building Commitment in February 2021. Ms. Esther An was also conferred the 2018 SDG Pioneer for Green Infrastructure and a Low Carbon Economy by the UN Global Compact for her advocacy of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and UNGC Caring for Climate Network signatory. She sits on the boards of advisory platforms of leading organizations, including World Green Building Council, Global Reporting Initiative, UNPRI Real Estate Advisory Committee, UNESCAP, Sustainable Business Network Executive Council, Urban Land Institute Sustainability Product Council, GRSB Foundation, Asia Pacific Real Estate Association, Singapore Institute of Directors ESG Committee. Wow, that's amazing. So without further ado, I'm going to give the time to Ms. Esther An, who's going to share about her perspective of the future of sustainability. Please.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for having me, and a very long introduction and a very kind introduction. I think I would just carry on from what Ben has shared. And I would think that everyone would probably agree that over the last 2 years, sustainability, or ESG, environment, social and governance, really exploded into the mainstream. And everybody, is talking about sustainability, whether it is on the global level, regional level, national level, or industry, business level. And I think when I first started the journey 20 over years ago, of course, people think that green building is like unnecessary, and people call me crazy when I introduced my first, recyclable shopping bag and all. But now, if you fast track to 2015 was really, you can see some changes because of Paris Agreement. And I have honors to actually also, attend COP25 at Madrid, and I didn't see that type of, dynamism and then the pace there. And but last year at Glasgow, I really can feel that, hey, there is an urgency there. And everywhere you turn, you can see race to zero, as what Ben just mentioned. And I think the sense of climate emergency is really there. And I think it is also because of COVID, the world has actually learned that, hey, our health of our planet, people, business, and economy is all interdependent and all interconnected. Without a healthy planet, there's no people or market for business to thrive, and no prosperity are we talking about. So I think the climate emergency and the will to achieve a net zero world become a common language and become a common force that bring people together. Hey, we all need to really do something to save the planet. If not, we will all not survive. Yeah, so I think that is actually, we at the building sector, at the World Green Building Council, we call it a North Star goal. So that is what drives us together. And of course, as a building, in the building sector, CDL has been around for almost 60 years now. And what we are proud of is not, that we grew from, we have grown from a small company with 8 employees to today. We are operating in 29 countries and regions. And we are in the position to drive change, because we are not just building home, just not building, commercial property, landlord or hotel management. We are building spaces. And we all know that building and construction sector actually has very high carbon and social impact, accounting for almost close to 40% of greenhouse gas emission globally. But I always say that we don't need to be in the real estate sector to make an impact, because all of us, you live in home, you work in the office, right? You also, use buildings, whether at work, at home, or even in hotels or, F&B. And people spend about 90% indoor. So how you use buildings will make a huge difference. So that's why I think it is all about the word collaboration, and also about caring, for outside our, our little framework of like just home, office, work and all. So you need to think bigger. When you use buildings, you also have to think hard that whether, although I don't pay the bill, should we leave every, light on, even you step out of the office and leave your computer on and all that. And then even when you go to hotel, you blast, aircon very high, very low, and then, water, you just consume it, at will. So I think the caring and consideration part is very important. It's all about people. And of course, at Glasgow, we also have seen, a lot of so-called zero around. And apart from the race to zero that account for 90% of GDP now, because you have like 1,000 over cities and regions, and also almost 8,000 companies, educators, financial and healthcare organizations joining the race to zero. We also see the financial sectors pushing it, driving it very, very fast. Okay, in 2019, we saw the formation of Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance. They are the one who control the biggest, investment in the world. And in 2021, last year, July, we saw the Net Zero Insurance Alliance formed. And in November at Glasgow, Net Zero Banking Alliance was set up. And also the very important alliance is actually the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. And what it comprises, actually comprises all the leading stock exchanges and, banks, investors and service providers and innovators and enterprises. So all these, come together, and you can see that what the common goal is about net zero. So I think I'm also very optimistic that now that we can really see change, and you can see the people who control the finance are really driving it. And as a private sector, what we are looking at is also, in the past, always people see is cost. Green building is cost. But if we look at it carefully, today the business case of embracing sustainability is much stronger. If you look at the green plan, and just now Ben talked about Singapore also really pledged for achieving net zero by or around 2050. And then what came with it in February that we all heard about carbon tax. Today, we're talking about $5 per ton, and in 2 years' time, less than 2 years actually, it will be 5 times more, it's $25. And in another 2 years, it will be $45. And by 2030, it will be as high as, $80. So that will also increase the, business costs and even grid price, whether individual or even, of course, businesses will be looking at it very carefully. And when we are familiar with the green plan, you can, the biggest one actually is energy reset. We all talking about net zero is about, largely contributed by energy. So for us in the building sector, the Green Building Master Plan is to green 80% of all buildings in Singapore. And now we are about 45%. So in the next 7 or 8 years, we have to green another almost, 35% more. So how are we going to tackle all these and meet all these so-called climate ambition, like what Ben say? So we are not talking about risk mitigation anymore. We are talking about risk adaptation. So, which bring me to, to the four strategic pillars of our, as a business private sector. We have actually our ESG strategy, and then the four pillars are actually the 4I we're talking about. Integration is very important. We can't, just practice sustainability alone. You need to feel, embrace it into your overall business strategy, from your board to the top management, mid-management, operation staff, from the headquarters to the subsidiary. Everybody must be integrated, and also your value chain, because you can't do it alone. Right? We are the bigger procurer, but we need to get the SME on board. And, and then so we actually have the second I is actually innovation. Without innovation technology, you will not move the needle. It will not suddenly become net zero. Nothing will change if you don't adapt, to changes and, embrace innovation and technology. And all these don't come free. So investment is the third I that we're talking about. So how do we find fundings to invest? And today, of course, we are looking at real ROI, even like improve energy efficiency. That will help us save a lot of, utility, expenditure and all that. And of course, you need to really invest in technology. And last but not least is impact. Everything we do has an impact. So behind me, you can see the SDG, and we can't do it alone. And we also have to measure, what is our impact, and also identify gaps and improve it, so that we can look at, the target of net zero. Where are we now every year on year, and you improve. Last but not least is the partnership. We can't do it alone as private sector. We work with the whole value chain, the whole ecosystem, from regulator, policymaker, and of course, financier, and contractor, like for us, and supplier, and of course people. We work with everyone actually, including youth and all that, which I will share a little bit more. If I may just give one example, which is the Singapore Sustainability Academy, which actually we thanks to NCCS, and it was actually opened by Senior Minister to Chia in 2017, and in his capacity as NCCS, and also driving climate action in Singapore. And it was actually opened with partnership, support of 6 government agency and 15 industry partner and NGO partner. For the past 5 years, we have actually engaged and reached out to tens of thousands of people, 630 events, and over the past 5 years. And not only reaching out to Singapore, but also reaching out, through digital platform. And of course, we have worked with the seeker, for some years already. So I can talk a little bit more on our youth program that I can go on forever. So I think I better stop here first. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Ms. Esther. And wow, that was a wonderful sharing. Hearing from you is really quite inspiring, knowing that, the private sector is actually in a position to actually create a lot of change, and that CDL itself has been at the forefront of this, starting very early, when it wasn't even like the most trendy thing to do. Really inspiring. So we have our last speaker, Ms. Nur Lastrina Hamid, who is the co-founder of Singapore Youth for Climate Action. So having organized community events and working with youth and volunteer groups for the past 10 years, Ms. Nur Lastrina Hamid has built an interest in climate issues and how people respond to climate impacts. In 2015, Lastrina co-founded SYCA, Singapore Youth for Climate Action, to engage youth in climate action or environment-related volunteerism. And her list of futures-related engagement previously included being on the panel for IPS, Institute of Policy Studies, annual flagship conference Singapore Perspective on new forms and movement. In the second panel, New Forms and Movement. She was also a panel speaker at the IPS Reimagining Singapore Forum on Sustainability and Livability. She was also a participant in the IPS Reimagining Singapore workshop on non-traditional threats to human security. So I give the time to Lastrina to share with us more about her perspective on the future of sustainability. Go ahead, Lastrina.
Thank you, Farah. And thank you to the LKY SPP team for the invite for me to be alongside the panel together here with Benedict and Esther as well. So, with Benedict setting the scene by sharing the 4 trends and Esther earlier on from the private sector perspective, including CDL's 4 strategic pillar, I think it's very clear for everyone, right? I'm coming in from the people's perspective, and maybe just to guide along for myself as well, in terms of this introductory remark, I'd like to give my response following the event blurb that was written on the website so that everyone also can follow along. So I'm just touching on 3 points, observations from the past decade and some lessons learned, where we have succeeded or where I think, we have succeeded from the people sector, and consider what this means moving forward for the people sector. So for the first point, as what Farah has mentioned earlier, I am someone who has been actively volunteering in the environment sector in Singapore. So from my perspective, I've seen, the giants of Nature Society Singapore from the late 90s, and I know they've been around prior to that. The giants of Singapore Environment Council, and subsequently the growth of ground-up initiatives such as Singapore Youth for Climate Action, Climate Conversations, SG Climate Rally, Accommodate SG, as well as individuals who are active on social media. I think if participants here are interested, you can check out Instagram accounts of Earth to Dorcas, Weird and Wild, BYO Bottle SG as well. So I'm just looking at all these growth the past 5 years and just want to make a point that from my personal observation, there is a growing movement of people who are talking about climate change and sustainability related issues, which brings me to the second point in terms of where I think we have succeeded. So I think we have succeeded in various ways. The one which I think is very apparent is increasing the discourse around climate change on social media. So I mentioned Instagram earlier. I'd also like to highlight TikTok as another very interesting platform to check out, all these climate change discussions. And I also like to highlight the youth statement that a group of youths and environmental organizations brought up towards end of last year as a lead to the COP26 Youth Day program. So in Singapore, we actually had a group of youths coming up with a public statement that was released in November, talking about, their demands or their goals for what they think climate action can be in Singapore. So that's one example. Another example in terms of, I think, where we have succeeded is how young people have contributed to change in company practices. So this one has been quite a while. Not sure if people can remember, but in Singapore in 2017, we had 2 teenage environmentalists. They were in school at that time. I'm so sorry for the jet sound. Not sure if you can hear that. So we had this 2 environmentalists who started off a petition asking for Old Chang-Kee and Polar Puffs also, I believe, to use sustainable palm oil. So I think it started off with good intention, and then also Old Chang-Kee had a response. They're already using healthier oil, but now they're looking into RSPO oil. And subsequently, there were changes made. So I think, that's just one example of how I think we have succeeded in changing companies' practices. Another one is in terms of how we have succeeded in contributing to change at the national policies level. So this one, maybe for those in Singapore, you may be aware last year and this year, we had PAP MPs filing the motion on climate change. So as part of that process, they also had like focus group discussions with young people, with green groups, and that was an avenue for us to create change at the national level. So just all these examples just to give you some highlights of where things have, I believe, have gone right and have succeeded in Singapore's context. And this brings me to my third point, right? So now that we have seen the growth in some successes, what does this mean moving forward? So for me, I see 2 things going on here. So one is in terms of the growing social movement, and the other one is in terms of the evolving nature of partnerships with the people sector and outside of that as well. So on the first part, on the growing social movement, so I'm just maybe inviting you to also imagine what's been happening globally, not just in Singapore, right? So globally, I think we may all be familiar with all these like climate rallies, maybe even civil disobediences in other countries when it comes to calling the government to do more, to do even more to tackle climate change in their respective countries. And then in Singapore, like I mentioned earlier, we have seen a growth of people interested in climate issues the past 5 years maybe. So I'm just looking at it from that context, and I'm just also trying to put this into a framework. So not sure if people here are familiar with the works of Bill Moyer. He's a US activist educator. He has done quite a few research and works for activists. And in one of his works, he talks about the stages of social movement. So I think when I was trying to look at that map and trying to plot out, okay, where are we in Singapore in that map? And it feels like we're in stage 4, where the social movement is just taking off. So the social causes, including climate change, is being talked about, even with higher visibility. People are starting to take a bit more, I would say, a bit more vocal on these issues, and it's just growing. And things can happen after this, right? Maybe there's more anger, or maybe people will fall into despair later on. But we're at that stage where it's just taking off. So I just wanted to point that out. And the other part that I talked about was the evolving nature of partnerships with the people's sector. So I think like what Esther mentioned earlier, like all those examples that's happening at the UN level, and the UN working collaboratively with government, private sector and whatnot, that is also definitely working in the Singapore context. So for those in Singapore, maybe you might be aware, the past 2-3 years or so, the Ministry of Sustainability and Environment has had citizens work group. I think the first one was on recycling right. Subsequently, it was on reducing excessive consumption of disposables. So there's sort of a launch, of actively or consciously working with regular citizens to enact change at the national level. And just wanted to highlight that maybe it's something new for us in Singapore, and maybe using this, we can try to explore a bit more other types of strategic collaboration between government, people, and private sector. So in conclusion, from the people's perspective, right, I was just remembering what Esther mentioned earlier about what we are in a position to drive change, what she said earlier. And I think just like to reframe that for everyone here in the audience as well, to ask ourselves, like when we're seeking change, what change are we talking about? Is it a change of power, a mindset, or policy? And then based on that, try to find ways where we can contribute to those changes. Yeah. Thank you, Farah. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nasrina. Yeah, really resonate with what Nasrina has mentioned just now. The power of a united voice by the people, really, having that youth published white paper or letter to the government that was mentioned by, that was addressed by Minister Grace Fu immediately right when it was published. I remember being part of it because I wrote part of it as well. And that when people actually band together to petition against the use of non-sustainable oil, palm oil, that like affected the decisions of these private sector companies. But also it's very interesting how there's like a growing social movement, really pushing for change, because it's really evident out there that there's an issue and we need to do better. But also the evolving nature of partnerships. And I think in the Singapore context as well, it's a very unique case where, we have our members of parliament, we have people in the public sector, like people like Benedict himself, that would bring in the voice of civil society. So these are really, really exciting things for me personally, but also I hope it is for you. So right now we are concluding this segment where we have spoken, each speaker has spoken. We are going into the Q&A segment, but before we go about that, perhaps if there are any questions from the panelists themselves, or you want to respond to any of the things that have been mentioned by any of the speakers, yeah, feel free to share. Or was it already mentioned in your part just now, perhaps?
Yeah, I think maybe a common thread that I hear from everyone is this idea of multi-stakeholder collaboration that we need even more. So I think just taking that, it's quite broad, right? Just trying to also filter it down to actionable items that we can do. Yeah, maybe just throwing it out to the government and private sector representatives or perspectives on what other things you think should happen in order for us to enact change and push from 2 degrees to like 1.5 degrees.
If I may chime in, actually, just now we are all talking about solar energy here. Actually, I'm on the NGOs campus here, and we are just lamenting that, it's so difficult to get our, home buyers to really invest in green building or green home and even solar panels and all that, because the appreciation of green feature is only, just started only the last couple of years. And, for anything like green mark platinum level or whatever, it cannot help us to, set a price that reflect that investment. So I think moving forward, I totally agree that consumers, is going to be a big driving force. Why? Because, they are the younger generations that will appreciate, greener product practices and, and a greener lifestyle also, and which is actually been pushing under the green plan as well, sustainable living, a city in nature, green economy, there are plenty of green jobs and all. So I think definitely all these is coming really fast. So how can we catch the wave and really help to engage, greater force for positive change? And I think consumer will be the ones to push it, because when there's demand, there is actually, supply. And, for many years, it's very hard that, private sectors are really feeling is that, oh, this is cost to go green. We have heard it, for many years. But if consumers are asking for it, there is a market, there is definitely a stronger business case. And, I think the younger generation is not going to keep quiet, and they're going to, drive that change. And I think, working with young people like Sika, we've been doing it, but I think we need to be really see action, not just talking. Okay, and we really need to have consistent, clearer idea of what exactly do you want us to do, and I think the young people will be able to implement it. It's like before Glasgow, we sit down with a couple of seekers, member Cheryl and Eswati, that hey, you are going to Glasgow, I'm also going. Shall we do collaborate and have a campaign to really create address the rising problem of eco-anxiety among young people? There are a lot of research and data showing it. The age group that are being affected become very depressed or disappointed or feeling a bit helpless of the future. It's the age group between 17 and 25 years old. So how can we help them? I mean, no point for everybody just sit down and then I feel depressed, I'm not doing anything. So what we want to do is like, hey, let's bring out the positivity of everyone. Yes, we are in trouble, but not to the extent of just sit here, do nothing. We need to turn this anxiety into action, turn, negativity to positivity. So that's why we launched this, like, love our planet, keep calm and love our planet campaign. Basically is like gather the young people to talk about it in your country. What is your problem, issue, and what have you done, to help? So we exchange notes and all that with all the young people, and we came back to Singapore. We continue the conversation. Consistency is important. It's not like a one-off campaign. You can change change the mindset. We have been doing it for 27 years now. So I'm sure that we can still continue to push the agenda and among not just the industry or private sector, but in the people sector as well.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Benedict, would you like to chime in or answer the question that is already?
I just wanted to maybe chime into what Esther and Esther and Lastrina actually talked about. And I wanted to build on this point about translating potential ideas to actually action itself. And I think we see this as happening in three key stages. The first is actually awareness. And awareness really understanding how much energy you're using, how much emissions you're giving out, what are your processes, what are your components that are contributing most to this. And I think critically is that awareness part that is quite important. And not everybody has a good sense of where they're emitting, which areas they're emitting. And then after that, I'd say is appreciating and understanding the opportunities. What you can do to take action, which are the areas where you take action, actually you'll make significant differences itself. I mean, in some instances, symbolic action is important, but actually we want and we want to support substantial action, which actually results in real outcomes itself. And then the last stage is about implementing the solutions itself. And I think this is quite wide-ranging. It's about in some instances the organization having the capacity to be able to execute. It's about government providing the necessary support, our incentive schemes and whatnot. But in many instances, it's also about being able to access financing itself. Are they able to get the broader support? Are banks willing to loan some of these organizations funds to actually implement some of these solutions itself? Because many of these sustainability solutions, they tend to have a higher cost upfront, though over the lifespan itself, you can more or less recover it. But it requires somebody that is willing to take a longer term view instead of looking at very near-term matrices in terms of how soon can I get my payback and whatnot. Yeah, so I thought that's quite important in terms of because the point I think which Lastrina talked about is that how do we get from 2 degrees to 1.5 degrees? Actually, there are opportunities out there, and what do you need to do to exploit these opportunities and to be able to translate that to action on the ground itself. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. Clearly, we all have to take a long-term view of this because we're all in the future space, and we all have to embrace this futures mindset, futures thinking. But yeah, so we have a wave of questions. The first question from Paulo Valenzuela. Benedict, you wanted to answer this question. The question is, the Paris Agreement states in Article 2 that we should pursue a 1.5 degrees limit. In 2015, there were not much studies supporting it, but negotiators inserted this into the text invoking the precautionary principle. Now with the release of the report on 1.5 at 6 AR, we have evidence needed to push for 1.5 limit. Okay, I've seen this report, it's quite scary. However, this entails a huge investment within this decade. In your opinion, is mitigation below 1.5 even possible at this point, or should we prepare for eventual adaptation? So it sounds like there are multiple scenarios in this, and if you could, expand a bit about these scenarios, that would be quite nice.
So I would say, maybe just to clarify, the Paris Agreement does mention 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees, but I think as the person actually rightly pointed out, the anchor was actually 2 degrees itself. 1.5 was mentioned in passing, but because of not much studies, there wasn't too much emphasis being placed on that. The Glasgow decision actually swapped that round. The goalpost has been changed to a 1.5 degree type goalpost. And I'd say over the years, if you look at some of the global assessment in terms of where we are at, actually, I recall seeing numbers 5-6 years ago, which says that actually the world was on a 3.2, 3.4 degree sort of pathway. If you added up all the pledges which countries said they would do and assume that they would do it, it will get you to about, I think, 3.3, 3.4 degrees. The latest numbers that I saw after Glasgow, I think the figure was 1.8 degrees to about 2.2 or 2.3 degrees. And the range is that 1.8 assumes everything all the way up to their long-term plans. The 2.2, 2.3 actually assumes only their nearer-term plans up to their NDC, which is 2030 itself. So you can see, if you assume that, if you look at whatever countries say they will do, there has clearly been a shift. There's clearly been an improvement in terms of the outcomes itself. But I think, which has been rightly pointed out, we are not at 1.5 degrees yet. There is still a gap. If you look at potential studies around the world, there is clearly the potential to reach 1.5 degrees. I think the main issue is a couple of issues. One, I think we need a system to ensure that when countries say that they would meet their pledge and then they put out a certain pledge, they are serious about meeting that pledge itself. I mean, Singapore is, I think, one of the few countries around the world that takes whatever we say very seriously. And in the past, we have been criticized for being a bit too conservative because of that. But the reason is that whatever we say we will do, we will actually do it. And you can count on us to actually achieve the outcome. So I think we need that to be more widespread. The other thing that we need is, because there's still a gap, countries to be able to update their ambition over time. Some countries that have came on board with less ambitious outcomes, maybe to look at what can be done, and to see whether there's scope to increase ambition. I think collectively over time, as the economics improve, as the technology improves, I would be a bit hopeful that we can keep the 1.5 degrees within reach itself. But I must emphasize this point, that even if we can get to 1.5 degrees, it doesn't mean that there's no climate impact. Right now, we are already at 1.1 degrees Celsius, and you look at the kind of climate impacts we are seeing with 1.1 degrees Celsius. Even in the best case scenario where we can hit 1.5 degrees, it's an increase from the current levels, which means that adaptation actually needs to take place. The issue is to what extent we need to adapt. I mean, if you miss the more you miss 1.5 degrees, the more adaptation is actually required. And there are a number of studies out there that actually shows that trying to reduce emissions is actually more cost effective than trying to adapt to the impact of climate change itself. Yeah, thanks.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Benedict. Clearly, we shouldn't be panicking. Keep calm and carry on. Okay. Thank you so much. So the next question, I think there are some overlapping questions, because the next one that is from Abhishek is somewhat similar about measuring the evidence. What evidence do we have that says that our efforts have borne fruit and the climate is healing? So clearly the idea here is that it's somewhere along the lines of how it was like for ozone related issue. But like you mentioned, Benedict, we already are moving 1.1 degree higher. So that's unfortunately, we're not healing, we're really adapting and mitigating as much risk as we can. Yeah, okay. Can we look at the private sector? When private sector does cost benefit analysis of green investment in, let's say, architecture, how does it calculate the benefits of its decision on the climate and environment beyond carbon footprint? This is something you can answer to, Esther?
Yeah, certainly. Actually, I have seen quite a few questions also. It's like, how, well, in Singapore, it's so hot. How can we, how can people adapt to the hot weather, or sacrifice, And as a developer, cooling is one of our top priority. The reason is we are just next to the equator, it's hot every day. Yeah, and in fact, recently you can even feel even hotter sometimes, even hotter than before. And well, according to data, Singapore is sitting up twice as fast as other parts of the world, So I think as a developer, we see it as from day one when we acquire a plot of land, how do we design it? How do we make use of the ventilation, natural ventilation and light and all that to minimize, tapping on air condition and all that is very important. And actually, a lot of experts already say that technologies are available, but like what Ben said, is about implementation. And of course, business, you also have to look at the business case of how can you invest and yet you can still maintain financially viable, because business need to survive. If not, the people who suffer is your employees. If you are not maintaining financial viability, you need to retrench people. The first group of people to suffer is your employers, your employees and your family. So we see it as environmental, social, financial sustainability are as important. Right. So I think what we need to do is really tap onto technology. And just now, Ben also talked about funding. Who is going to fund it, right? We can't just pass down the investment to our consumers. So I think what we have done is we launched the first green bond as far back as in 2017. And well, in recent year, I would really say that a lot of banks are actually already stepping up on, sustainable finance, green loan, sustainability linked loan and all that. Really put money, to accelerate climate action and green building and green infrastructure. We have seen that. You can see the data, even globally, you can see that, green finance volume has exceeded $1 trillion this year. So in Singapore also, we have seen a lot more banks, are very into, providing green loans and green bond and all that as well. So, but now is also we need to educate. Like for example, maintaining buildings is something that high impact as well. And we also have digital platform and I think you probably have experienced the same thing when you walk into some big hotel, the conference room are not even using, but why is the lights are all on, air cons are all on. So what we have actually looked at it is all the building owners are also looking at how can we use digital platform using sensors to identify area that when there's no usage, you don't need to provide the lighting or the air condition. You need something very implementable, solutions, digitalize, such resource providing gadget. So I think there are definitely, ways to reduce and consumption and improve efficiency is very important. You can't switch off every light, and you can't, just tell our tenants that we are not going to provide air condition for 3 hours, So we need to look at productivity, comfort of users, and also look at how technology can help to improve efficiency and how can we design to reduce, to optimize it so that we don't need to rely totally on air condition. So there are a lot of issues that we are looking at, and not just today, we already started, and just now I talk about we are at NGOs here talking to many scientists and designer, architect, engineer to look at what can we do with more renewable energy? What sort of solar panels are we talking about? Not just the flat panels, but looking at building integrated, facade panels. And we are looking at a lot of, solutions and technology. And we're tapping onto like innovators, young startup and all. So we are doing a lot of, the businesses are looking at very, very many solutions. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We have a question. I think maybe perhaps give the space for Lastrina as well to talk about advocacy. Question from Crystal Ng. One of the themes raised during the recent GCNS, Global Compact Network Singapore Youth Forum, was how we could be inclusive in the sustainability movement. How do we include the older generation as well? Would love panelists' input on such intergenerational sustainability movement. Thank you. Lastrina, you want to chime in? I know you're not just representing youth now, you're representing us in the advocacy space, please.
Thanks, Crystal, for the question. I think for me, perhaps the way I respond to this would be in two different parts, right? So first is how do we include the older generation, the current older generation rather. So I think if I think about the current older generation, maybe I would like to rephrase it back to you, like, why do you think we need to include the older generation and not the older generation, including us, the younger generation, in their activities, in their contexts? So I'm just thinking that, it works both ways. And for me, when I think about it like that, then the question for me is how do we get people talking to each other? And how do we get together? How do we create a common space with each other, talk with each other and work towards a common cause? So when I think of it from that perspective, and then in terms of the advocacy side of things, then, one good example that I can think of is what Farah was previously involved with, which is Repair Kopitiam. So Repair Kopitiam, I think when it first started off, yes, the idea, I think Farah can share even better, but the idea of going into neighborhoods, engaging with the residents to repair their appliances, and over time, in terms of the model of engagement, I think for Repair Kopitiam also, they actively involved the older generation to be the, what do you call them, Farah? The repair masters?
Coaches.
Repair coaches. So I think, that's a very current example of how advocacy groups or green groups can engage the older generation in the sustainability movement, right? So that's I guess, one part of my response to you, Crystal. The other part of my response here, I'm just going back to, the idea of futures thinking and maybe perhaps what we've been talking about so far is scenario planning and just responding to the current context. I'm also trying to look at futures in terms of a longer time frame, right? So 2030, 2050, beyond. In Singapore's context, currently we have 1 out of 4 aging is an elderly in terms of aging population. 2030 onwards, we're looking at 1 out of 3, if I'm not wrong. So it's 1 out of 4 to 1 out of 3. In terms of aging population. And then in terms of the things associated with aging population is healthcare. So this one is something that I learned because of my work. So I got to know of this organization called Healthcare Without Harm and the work that they do. In one of the reports they released last year, they mentioned that healthcare in Singapore is one of the top carbon emitters in the world. If you want to, and it's comparable alongside countries like Australia, Canada, and US. So if I'm looking at that context where I know, so it's a certain fact, right, that we will have an aging population in Singapore, and then there's going to be a growing need in the healthcare sector. Then in terms of my thinking right now, going back to what Esther mentioned about the built environment, the cooling systems, how then can Singapore cater to the growing needs of the healthcare sector while at the same time minimizing their carbon emissions? So then I think that sort of framing and thinking gives way to another set of questions in terms of how we can engage the future older generation now to think about what we can do to cater to our lifestyle needs in the next 20, 30 years. So yeah, Crystal, that's the great question, right? Because now I'm thinking of different sets of alternative futures that might happen in Singapore. Well, in this case, it's a certain future, right? But also this gives way to other alternative futures that might happen in Singapore. So given the current context, like very recently, just 2-3 days ago, with Malaysia cutting their supply of chicken into Singapore, that effectively cuts 1/3 of chicken poultry supply, right, into Singapore. So I think when I look at the certain pathway for Singapore, like, it's great that the government 2-3 years back already launched the 30 by 30 plan, and we're working towards that, and we're now inviting companies to be based off Singapore, or like, we're pumping so much money into companies such as Shok Meats, for example, to explore, I think, vegan seafood. So there's so many things going on right now in terms of growing the food industry and in terms of meeting the needs 30 by 30, right, by 2030. But I'm also thinking, okay, that alternative future that Singapore might be a vegetarian society 2030 and beyond is also one that I would like to imagine that is an alternative future, with what Malaysia has sort of the consequences of what Malaysia has done for Singapore. It's very real, and other similar instances like that might happen in the near future. So then there's the alternative future of, okay, maybe Singapore might be a vegetarian society 2030 and beyond, or vegan society for that matter. So what can I do now to explore those alternatives and those reimagined pathways, right? So there's so many things I think we can talk about in this sustainability space that I think we just need to be a bit more creative in terms of maybe what we imagine, and there needs to be that collective reimagination and rethinking about what Singapore can be 2030 and beyond.
Yeah, if I can expand on it, Lestrina, is very real, and I think health is actually on the top priority of everyone now. And during COVID, actually, I think the data show that people spend more time outdoor because we are locked down. We can't go to shopping mall or restaurant and all that. Actually, a lot of people go to parks and park connectors, and sometimes you find it more crowded than more. So I think people are very concerned of health, and even for the building environment, we look at IAQ, indoor air quality, more important than ever, because in the past we're already looking at it, but now tenants actually even ask like, oh, what is your filtering system? Is your indoor quality very good? Talk like, really they're an expert. So we understand, and then these are all the changing mindset, and we are also a consumer. We are not just, a builder. So I think these are all on top of our priority. And in fact, for newer development, we devoted like a lot more than mandatory requirement of 40% into greenery. And like the one that in our East Coast Amber Park is 65% of, you know, the site area for landscaping, facilities, you know, running track and all that. So people are actually definitely, you know, welcome. You know, this is also an opportunity for product to be adjusted, moderated to meet the, you know, you know, the growing trend, the future needs. And you're very right. We actually are also promoting, like, you know, community farming and residents. We are saying, you know, herbal farming and all that. And in fact, we are also piloting. I think you saw the two set of indoor hydroponic sets in our academy. Every 2-3 weeks, they actually harvest a lot of lovely vegetables. Okay, and we are actually trying to promote, you know, welcome, you know, just to give a heads up that in World Environment Day coming up, we are actually, you know, showcasing like edible garden. A gentleman called Midnight Gardener, actually, she really grow a lot of vegetable greenery along the corridor of his HDB flat. So we are showcasing that. We hope that to support the 30 by 30 goal, we want to promote the idea of farming everyone, everywhere, whether at home, you know, at work or at school, or even, you know, F&B outlet, you know, from farm to table. We actually, you know, grow your own herbs and put on the table. So I think there are a lot of things, creativities, you know, there's no boundary. And looking at Crystal's question, actually, I was a speaker on the panel for inclusivity. And I always say that when you talk about saving the world, sustainability, it should go beyond the borders or boundaries of country, gender, age group, and cultures. Everybody has equal opportunity and responsibility to drive the green agenda, whether older or younger generation. We should all work together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Esther. I just want to chime in on that part because Repair Kopitiam was mentioned. Clearly there's, I mean, to us, when we started Repair Kopitiam, there was also this appeal to the different motivations of people when it comes to sustainability. Not everybody is going to jump into it thinking that they are going to save the world. They just want to do something that is interesting and good for them. So for Repair Kopitiam, which is a movement on repair, these elderlies who joined in wanted to basically you know, learn repair, you know, use their hands, you know, as they retire already, so they're a bit they wanted to try something new. So I think looking at inclusivity in that way, where we motivate people in different aspects of their lives, instead of just telling them about it being green and, you know, getting them to understand sustainability. I think that's a way to look at it. Yeah, so that is on that question. Thank you for that question, Crystal. We actually have time for one more question, and I know that Benedict has already chopped some question. He has pre-selected some questions to answer. Benedict, would you like to choose one of them before we end of this session?
Okay, I can maybe say something very brief. I was hoping to answer all the questions.
And I also would love you to answer all the questions.
In very, very short, yeah. So there was a question on hype and things being fluffy. And I would say that one of the things that we are seeing is that both in the voluntary space as well as in the more mandatory space itself, corporate disclosure requirements, things like Science-Based Target Initiative, things like the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. These actually require companies, corporates out there, when we put up a certain target, to actually back it up by concrete measures itself. And I think such initiatives are important because I do agree you need to go beyond the hype, you need to go beyond the fluff. If not, it will be seen as greenwashing, and that would hurt us more than help us itself. There was another question in terms of holding corporates responsible for contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. And I know Esther probably alluded to it earlier, but I just wanted to make the pitch to say that as part of our announcements this year on increased climate ambition, we also talked about increasing the carbon tax rate in Singapore. Previously, it's currently at $5, and previously we said we'll go up to 10 to 15, but the revised rate is to push it up to $25, $45, and then by the end of this decade, $50 to $80. And we see the carbon tax as important as a price signal to get companies to internalize some of the externalities that they are causing as a result of greenhouse gas emissions itself. The last question, which I just wanted to answer very, very briefly, is how is Singapore contributing to knowledge sharing? And I'd say one of our key programs is our Singapore Cooperation Program, where we bring key government officials from other countries around the region to Singapore to train. And so far, we have been involved in training more than 100,000 officials on climate and sustainability areas itself. But I'd say we think we don't want to be seen as like being above them and being a leader per se, because I think what we have realized is that going forward, actually, it's important to see them as partners. How can we collaborate together to implement some of the solutions that can help the region as a whole and individual countries actually meet some of their emissions and climate and sustainability goals itself? Yeah, thanks.
Wow, that was amazing. You answered all 3 questions within 2 minutes. Thank you so much, Benedict. Okay, so concluding thoughts. I think the last thing that you want to say to everybody, to maybe if there's one takeaway, what you feel about sustainability and how the future could be better, if you could share with us just a one-liner before we end off the session, that would be great. So maybe we'll start with Lastrina, the last speaker to the first speaker again.
I think for me would be always read the news. Yeah, I will not elaborate, but yeah, always read the news. Yeah.
Yes, I'm quite sure. Yeah, having a pulse on it, important. All right, thank you. How about you, Esther?
Well, I think I would just end with ABC, right? Turning ambition to action, okay? And the business case, it will become stronger. So the cost of action will be cheaper than the cost of inaction, and moving forward. And last but not least is collaboration, because one people cannot do everything, but with everyone can do something, to amplify action and impact.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. And last but not least, Benedict.
Well, maybe just something very simple. Let's work together to keep the hopes of 1.5 degrees alive so that we can leave the world a better place for our children and for the next generation. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, everybody. I mean, if this was a big room, I would have asked everybody to give a round of applause, but thank you. You can give reactions on the chat maybe, but thank you so much to our panelists. I would now like to hand over the time to our host, Cheryl. Thank you so much, everybody. See you again.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to Farah, Benedict, Esther, and Lastrina. It was such a wonderful conversation. And I think you all brought your different perspectives to this discussion. I think for me, my big takeaway is when we're looking at the future of something as big and complex as sustainability, it's really about working together. And I really love what Lastrina said about harnessing collective imagination, right? Which is so much core to what we do in Futures work, to also kind of establish, I would say, different ideas, right? Different possibilities of what this future could look like, and I love the action oriented and the action bias that, even as we dream up these alternative futures, we still have a responsibility and a duty of care to take action today, So thank you so much for your generous sharing, our 3 panelists, and of course the wonderful moderation, Farah. So it leaves me just to kind of slowly, gently wrap up the session, and share a little bit some so admin or housekeeping matters before as we wrap up, before we end up our session. Can I get the slides up, if that's okay? Okay, so the first thing is really thank you very much for joining us. We always have such a great diversity of audience in these sessions, and we benefit a lot from your feedback. We do read the feedback quite seriously. So please let us know if you haven't already by scanning the QR code and just letting us know what what your thoughts are, any key kind of feedback that you would like us to know. And I think the other part is also any ideas for future webinars, where we commit to doing these regularly. And it's our contribution, in a small way from an academic institution to the knowledge sharing. So if you've got any ideas of future topics that you would like us to cover, please share that as well. Next slide, please. Oops. One before, yep. So we at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, we're from the Executive Education Department, so we do run many executive programs, of course, in Futures. So the next one that is coming up is the Future of Public Policy Run. This is our in-person program. We're delighted to be back to face-to-face in the classroom. So if you apply now, there is a 20% early bird. We do run other public policy open enrollment programs as well. So communications, essentials of policy development, which is our kind of like intro to policy, and of course more in impact evaluation analysis. So those are some of the upcoming programs that we're running. Again, if you would like more info, please get in touch with the team. They can also scan the QR code for more info on these programs. Next slide. We were really delighted for this particular webinar to partner with our colleagues, at NUS as well, kind of looking at what we do kind of more broadly, in terms of what we do in sustainability and climate change as a university, and not just our small graduate public policy school, but a much wider university. So, if you are interested to find out more about how we think about sustainability and these issues, and I mean, not just, also leveraging on our expertise, research, and so on, please take a look, again, scanning the QR code, as well as that link here for more info, and just to get a little bit of a sense of what the NUS overall view is. I'd be very interested also to engage you in our other areas of expertise beyond just the public policy space. Next slide. And then the last one, please keep in touch. So if you're interested in futures, interested in executive education, or would like to connect with us on LinkedIn, we're very welcome to get in touch with us at the emails and QR codes listed here. I think that's the last slide. So that leaves me to wrap up today's session. And just to say that, okay, thank you very much for joining us today. Really delighted to host all of you again. Thank you again to our wonderful panel. So Benedict, Esther, as well as Astrina, and of course to our moderator, Farah. I really hope the conversation continues either in person or in the online space, and do encourage you to continue to mull about the future of sustainability as you enjoy the rest of your day and evening. Thank you very much on behalf of all of us at the Lee Kuan Yew School. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for joining us.